Master Rinzai said, "A man who has left home should know how to see clearly and calmly, should know Buddha from Mara, the true from the false, the worldly from the sacred. If he has got this knowledge, he can truly be called a leaver of home." Master Rinzai said, "A man who has left home should know how to see clearly and calmly, should know Buddha from Mara, the true from the false, the worldly from the sacred. If he has got this knowledge, he can truly be called a leaver of home. If he does not know Buddha from Mara, then in effect he leaves one home only to enter another, and is what is called a karma-producing living being. He cannot yet be called a true leaver of home. For if Buddha and Mara happen to appear in one form, he could not differentiate them. Yet, as the Ganda king knows how to drink only the milk from a mixture of milk and water, so does the clear eye know how to differentiate. Followers of the way, just beat up both Buddha and Mara. For if you love the sacred and hate the worldly, you go on floating and sinking in the ocean of birth and death." So here we have part of a sermon from Master Rinzai, and he's bringing in these two characters, the Buddha and also Mara. And for those who may not know Mara, Mara appears in the Buddha's own story. If you remember when he sat under the Bodhi tree for 7 days and 7 nights, it was during that time that Mara, who is known as the tempter, tried to tempt the great being, the great bodhisattva sitting under the Bodhi tree, away with 3 temptations. The first was the call to duty, telling him he should go home and be a father to his son and husband to his wife, and also he was heir to the throne as well. Secondly, then, it was the daughters of Mara, who represent desire, who tried to entice him away. And then the sons of Mara, who are the demons of fear, who try to drive him away using terror. And in all cases, obviously, it failed, and then Mara withdrew. So Mara, according to the sort of cosmology, if you like, to the pantheon in the realm of the gods in India, is the god of samsara. And he shouldn't really be confused with the Western conceptions of Satan or the devil, because he isn't in that way, although unfortunately he is sometimes referred to as the evil one in translations of texts into the West. But to be perfectly honest, evil is a specifically Christian concept that doesn't really fit well in Buddhism. And really what he is, of course, is the factor of delusion. He's the god of desire, because that's the realm of samsara, and he is god of samsara as well. This is his kingdom, and he doesn't want to see the kingdom depopulated. And naturally he plays a dual role. One is tempter, second is tester. That means that any beings who look like they're about to escape from samsara to nirvana, he tests to check that they are ready to actually undergo that final turnaround. Because if they're not, then the heart can be shattered by the experience. If it still has too much I in it, if it's still run by delusion, then going into nirvana can shatter the vessel. So Buddha obviously represents the truth of seeing. The whole point about the Buddha, remember, is a title meaning the awakened one. He's awakened to the truth. So Buddha is truth, and Mara is falsity. Mara is delusion, and Mara is deception. So this is what he's referring to. And he's basically talking about the eye that sees. Because in Buddhism, and particularly in Mahayana Buddhism, we remember there is that phrase that says, nirvana is samsara, and samsara is nirvana, which seems strange, because the samsara is the realm of suffering, nirvana is the realm of peace, and so therefore, to me, who lives in the world of opposites, those two cannot be the same place, cannot be in the same place. They must be different realms, and so if they are different realms, then we must escape from this realm of samsara, and we must go to another realm, maybe above or below or whatever, in order to escape. Interestingly, in the Gospel of Thomas, one of the early Gnostic Gospels, the Christ in that Gospel says, if you think the kingdom of God is in the sky, then the birds will precede you. If you think it is at the bottom of the ocean, then the fishes will precede you. And he goes on to say, the kingdom of God is spread across the face of the earth, but the eyes of men cannot see it. And this is exactly what Master Rinzai is also pointing to as well. That samsara is nirvana, and nirvana is samsara, and that it's not about traveling to a different place. It's about seeing things as they really are. That's the difference. So it's always consciousness that's afflicted, and this, of course, invokes the Buddha's one of the Buddha's early sermons called the Fire Sermon, where he said that this house is on fire. This house being the heart and the body. It's afflicted by the passions, by the great fires of greed, hatred, and delusion, and that there's no peace in such a house. And so those fires must be put out. And once they're put out, which is what nirvana actually means, the extinguishment of the passions, then peace is attained. Peace is maintained and peace is realized, we could say. One doesn't have to move a single foot from where one stands in order to do that. That it's done right here, right now. Hence, nirvana is samsara, samsara is nirvana, passions are the Buddha nature is the passions. So he starts by saying a man who has left home should know how to see clearly and calmly, should know Buddha from Mara, the true from the false, the worldly from the sacred. If he has got this knowledge, he can truly be called a leaver of home. So a leaver of home is a title that's given to the ordained Sangha, a monk or a nun. They're called leavers of home because, in effect, that's what they did. If you go back to both India and China, the family obviously is the basic social unit, and you were born, you were raised, you lived, and you grew old and you died within its embrace, and that was your support network. So it was pivotal, and society was based on that. So to leave home in one sense, was a very shocking thing to do. And in fact, Buddhism in China suffered from a great deal of opprobrium from the state, precisely because it was seen to be anti-family, encouraging men and women to leave home, to go out and join the Sangha. But this is where they get their name, and it means, leaving that world behind in order to follow the Buddha's path. And so this is Master Rinzai is saying, well, actually, being a leaver of home is not about putting on a robe and going to a monastery. It's about a complete change in consciousness. And it doesn't matter whether you're a householder, it doesn't matter whether you're an ordained member of the Sangha, a priest, whether you're a high official or a lowly farmer. The only thing that matters is whether consciousness can see clearly. That's it, and that's the whole of Master Rinzai's teaching. This is what this passage is really pointing to. And so, we have to ask ourselves, what's the difference? What's the difference between Buddha and Mara? Well, what's the difference between the passions and the Buddha nature? The difference is that the Buddha sees clearly, as we've said, and Mara is blind. And so that it is that delusion that has to be underdone. And what, of course, is the arch delusion? Well, it's the attachment to the delusion of a separate self, of a separate enduring self, me, in other words, I, me, and mine. It's I who see things deceptively, who clings to my opinions, and is convinced that they are always true, and that there is a great emotional involvement in them. And the more that the passions get stirred up, then the more that I am actually there. And I remember, if you know your sort of British folklore, legends and myths, the story of King Arthur, when the story of the conception of King Arthur, that his father, who was the king, fell in love with the wife of one of his knights, and he sent the knight away to battle in a distant land, and then laid siege to the castle in order to try and basically snatch away the wife and have his way with her. And she realised this, and being in the castle, obviously it was a fortified stronghold, they managed to keep him out, but there wasn't much of an army there, so they just laid siege and tried to sort of starve them out. The story goes that the father, the king, called his great magician Merlin and said, you must get her for me. And this is where Merlin sort of struck the sort of classic Faustian bargain, saying, well, I'll let you have your wicked way, but I must have the fruit of your lust, which of course was the boy Arthur. Now, the story goes that Merlin carried this out by casting a spell on the king, and basically what he did was he dressed him up in the armour of the husband, and then cast this spell to make him look like him, and that was how he gained entry into the castle and how he had his way, and the whole story carries on from there. But what is interesting, I think, with this is that, yes, okay, obviously this is myths and legends, stories of magic and miracles and great wonders, but also, it could just be that Merlin was just a very good psychologist. He knew perfectly well that the wife, her name was Igraine, was terrified. The one thing she wanted more than anything else, the one thing she desired more than anything else, was to be rescued by her husband. And, when suddenly this figure that looked like her husband sort of appeared on the doorstep, her imagination, taken over by her strong desire to be rescued, cast the rest of the spell, and so she was fooled, she was deceived. There we have the Mara, and it was her consciousness that was deceiving her as well, obviously, as the king. So it's an interesting story, and those of you who are familiar with the Buddha's parable of the rope, the man who sees the snake on the in the twilight, jumps back, and then Buddha tells him to look again, and he realizes it's just a piece of discarded rope, and sort of sighs a breath of relief, goes to step over it, and Buddha says, pick it up. He picks it up, and in the half-light he realizes it's not even a piece of old rope, it's actually a string of gems. So this is again, all these stories reflect how a consciousness itself, if it's subject to delusion, then it doesn't see properly. And if it doesn't see properly, it blunders about, it makes mistakes, and its unintended consequences are suffering. So this is the link between being able to see things as they really are, and thus be able to navigate life with, as little suffering as is reasonably possible. It's never possible to completely eradicate suffering. The world, as we know from the First Noble Truth, it's part of the weft and weave of the world. But a lot of suffering is also created by us, and in Buddhism, this is through delusion. So hence the importance of awakening to the truth and becoming enlightened in this way to what is real. So this is what Master Rinzai is really pointing to here. A man who has left home, don't forget he's talking to his monks, should know how to see clearly and calmly. Clearly and calmly. Can I see calmly? Aren't I the one who frets? It's interesting, even in the practice, people can become a little bit obsessed about purity, for example. And what I mean by purity is sort of sticking to the rules of things. And I remember once at a meal, there was at Shobo An at the temple, someone was tasked with pouring tea for about half a dozen people who were there, and this person was nervous, and she was pouring the tea achingly slowly, so very carefully. She clearly was really worried that a drop of tea might not go in the cup. and so it was achingly slow. And Myokyo-ni said to her, just do it normally. And the sort of shock went through her, and she sort of did speed up a little bit. And afterwards, the lady said, I was just trying to do it right. And Myokyo-ni said, almost as an afterthought, she said, you can either be good or you can be whole, but you cannot be both. And this goes back, to something that she had said before. She said the very first teacher who taught Mahayana to her had said, in the early teachings, according to the Dhammapada, the Buddha said, do as little harm as possible, as little bad as possible, do as much good as possible, purify the heart. This is the teaching of all the Buddhas. It's a famous verse from the Dhammapada. So you can see the Buddha threw out the bad, but in Mahayana, the Buddhas of the Mahayana throw out the good as well. And that might seem quite startling to us. Why would we want to throw out good? Well, it's not for nothing that there is that saying that the road to hell is paved with our good intentions. And this is it. And it's still very prevalent now. There's a view that as long as I believe the truth and I know the truth and I stick to what is true, then it's the other if anything goes wrong, it's the other person who won't do it. And isn't that really how a lot of our conflicts start? They start from a partisan attitude, that our seeing is immediately slanted in one particular way. And this is the Buddha's insight. This is why, because don't forget, the Buddha taught the truth. He taught the Buddha Dharma, the teachings, which is the truth. But even the Buddha, as soon as he taught the truth, gave us that parable of the raft. He said, my teachings are like a raft. They're for crossing over from the river of life, from samsara to nirvana. But when you get to the other side, don't cling on to that raft. Don't carry it over dry land on your back. Lay it down gratefully and then continue unencumbered on your way. And he finishes by saying, so you see, monks, my teachings are for crossing over with, not for seizing hold of. Because he knew perfectly well that the good turns poisonous if I cling to it. Because it's this clinging of I to anything, really, anything at all, that eventually stirs up the passion, stirs up opprobrium. We get into the whole praise and blame thing, projecting out, because obviously if I'm good, then you must be bad if you don't agree with me. And it's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. But it's so convincing. And this is why my opinions are also very much regarded as vehicles and vessels for the fires. And of course, even more so, particularly now, because, if what I believe is good and right, then, any opposition to that must, by definition, be evil, because the opposites arise together. You cannot separate the good from the bad. You cannot separate the bad from the good. This is just impossible. Unlike in the Western view, where St. George, who represents the good, can slay the evil dragon. In the East, it is that yin-yang, isn't it? The black fish with the white eye and the white fish with the black eye. And that opposition of the colour of the fish to the colour of the eye is deliberate, because that eye is the seed of its opposite and it exists in its opposite. This was just something that was very obvious, and particularly, in Chinese thinking, that this happens together. And again, we look into the world. Which is the safest airline to go with? The one that's recently had an accident. If you think about all the health and safety legislation that we have, it's come from the deaths and accidents that have been the result of negligence, because in the desire to turn a profit, safety can go out of the window. And so it's not until suddenly it comes back and bites us that we suddenly think, oh, maybe that wasn't such a good idea after all. Well, what blinded me? Wasn't it my desire? Wasn't it my greed? It usually is. So, hence we as Kipling said, the fool's bandaged finger goes wobbling back to the fire. Each time it seems we have to learn and relearn and re-relearn these things. If you want a poem that talking of Rudyard Kipling, if you want a poem that really puts hits the nail on the head, then actually the poem that's called "The Gods of the Copybook Headings" is the one for you. It's where that line comes from. The fool's bandaged finger goes wobbling back to the fire. It just shows how we repeat the mistakes and repeat the mistakes and repeat the mistakes again. Yeah, that's what happens, and that's what Master Rinzai is also saying. If he has got this knowledge, that is that he can differentiate Buddha from Mara. He can truly be called a leaver of home. If he does not know Buddha from Mara, then in effect he leaves one home only to enter another. Yeah, I remember someone at school came from a very religious family, and he really had that missionary zeal as a young man for his religion. And then he grew older and he rejected his religion, and he believed something that was quite different to that, much more sort of humanistic, very different set of values. But he was equally zealous, equally had that missionary zeal, that fervour about him when he spoke about these things. So yes, one leaves one house to enter into the house of the other. It's just maybe it's equal and opposite, but it's still another place that I cling to. In other words, what he's saying to here is this house or this home is this place where I am comfortable. These are the beliefs and values with which I am comfortable. These are the ones that I identify with, and that's why the lever of home actually is much more an attitude rather than a mendicant walking the countryside, although that certainly can be part of it. But it's really much more an attitude, living with uncertainty. One lives in the house, and the Buddha in the early Pali Canon, I heard it quite recently, where he said, what is the way to look upon ourselves and our homes and our property, to see that they are all impermanent and that we are mere caretakers of them all, and that at any time they can be taken away. In another place, Master Rinzai says of this being taken away suddenly, the murderous demon of impermanence strikes in an instant, both high and low. If he does not know Buddha from Mara, then in effect he leaves one home only to enter another, and is what is called a karma-producing living being. He cannot yet be called a true leaver of home. So a karma-producing being is a being who operates always through his passions, always through his intentions, which are based on those passions as well. These are I-based intentions, rather than what again Master Daiyu used to call the desire of the heart, which is not the same as my desire. The desire of the heart is more a leaning with, as in the heart leans towards nirvana, slides towards nirvana, moves towards nirvana. Yes, things do trend, things go in a certain way, but there's a whole situation, and then there's what I want, which is usually something contrary, something different, and it's just about me, what we call selfish. And so a karma-producing being just means someone who is constantly, whose activities tie them more and more to the wheel of life, tie them more and more to the wheel of suffering. And this is because I act blindly, I make the same mistakes again and again and again. and then I regret them, and then I think, oh, how did I get myself into this mess? Why is it always me? Why do I find myself in this place? I promised myself I wouldn't, and yet here I am again. Same mistakes, same mistakes, same mistakes. And, I remember when I began this practice, and one of the suggestions that was given was to have a timetable. And so I set a time to get up in the morning and a time to go to bed at night. And the thing was, for many years, I'd had a habit that my alarm would go off at 7 o'clock in the morning, and the radio would come on, and I would listen to the news headlines for 10 minutes and then get up. But the instruction was that when the alarm goes off, get up immediately. But I really liked that 10 minutes. But, on the other hand, I really wanted to do this practice. And so at night, I would say to myself, tomorrow, definitely when the alarm goes off, straight out of bed, the alarm would go off, the radio would come on, and I would listen to the news headlines for 10 minutes. And I would lie there arguing with myself, fighting with myself. Get out of bed. Oh, no, it's just a few more minutes. And it wasn't until the penny dropped and I suddenly realized that the one in the evening who made the vow and the one who woke up in the morning were two quite different beings. The one in the evening was the aspiration to walk the path. But in the morning, it was my old habit that was very comfortable. Thank you very much. And it wasn't until someone made the suggestion to me, okay, don't make the vow, don't set it up, because that's just another pair of opposites, and you're basically seeding the opposition, you're stirring up the opposition. Use a skillful means. And the skillful means was when the alarm goes off in the morning, immediately, just with one hand, throw the covers off, throw the duvet off, and just lie there on the bed. And you can lie there as long as you want. Well, of course, lying there in the cold, I didn't particularly want to lie there in the cold. I thought, well, I may as well go and have a shower then. So I got up out of bed, and that was it. I didn't have to listen to the news anymore, because it wasn't just about listening to the news. It was about lying in a nice, warm, comfortable bed for 10 extra minutes. That's what it was about. And that's what I was clinging to, what I didn't want to let go of. So there we are. That's a karma-producing living being. He cannot yet be called a true leaver of home. For if Buddha and Mara happened to appear in one form, he could not differentiate them. No, he couldn't. He couldn't differentiate them because, as we've said, if something is good and the Buddha said this and you disagree with it, then I punch you, because, this is justifiable in my eyes. If you will not conform to what I think you should conform to. This is very much with us now. And then he goes on. Yet, and gives this example, yet as the Gander King knows how to drink only the milk from a mixture of milk and water, so does the clear eye know how to differentiate. So the story goes that, according to folklore, the Gander King, the king of the geese, is so elevated, so refined, that if you were to put a bowl of milk and water in front of him, he could drink the milk without touching the water, just leave the water behind, but remove all the milk from the mixture. And he likens this ability to the refinement of consciousness, being able to see the fine from the gross, the truth from the falsity, and really, a lot of this truth, a lot of this, what he's referring to, this wisdom, is the wisdom of realizing the consequences of our actions. Again, go back to that early quote from the Pali Canon, when the Buddha said, what is the correct way to look upon this world? And he said, all our property, ourselves, our views, everything, to see them as impermanent. When we recognize that everything comes to be and ceases to be, and therefore there's nothing that could be called mine, not even me. Not even me. When that really is in the heart, then suffering comes to an end. because there's an acceptance of the nature of the world and the nature of the things in the world. The world and the things in the world, of course, are a macrocosm and a microcosm. They make up each other. They are interdependent. Followers of the way just beat up both Buddha and Mara. Now that might sound totally contradictory to what has been said before, but actually he's really just upholding the Buddha's own parable of the raft. He says, do not even cling to Buddha and Mara. Because, if I become obsessed with either Buddha or Mara, then that too just becomes another vehicle for the passions. No, the greatest prize in Zen training is what's called mushin. Mu means empty, and shin means heart, the empty heart. And this is the heart that is empty of I and empty of opposites. 4. If you love the sacred and hate the worldly, you go on floating and sinking in the ocean of birth and death. And that's interesting because Buddhism is an immanent religion. It's a religion that sees Buddha or the sacred in the worldly, and that the sacred and the worldly cannot be separated one from the other fundamentally. And that even in his time, Rinzai's it was still a temptation, and we hear it nowadays. People often say, "Oh, the training is so hard. Meditation, zazen, it's so hard. Oh, if only I could live at the top of a mountain in a monastery in China or Japan, it would be so much easier." It's always in this other place. If only the circumstances were different. If only this. No, it's these circumstances are the training ground, and that's it really. This is what is so important, that the training ground is exactly where the own feet stand right now, not in some other imagined circumstance, because we take our hearts with us wherever we go. And again, there's some verses in the Dhammapada that says something along the lines of, you can run to the forest, you can go to the mountain, you can go to the most secret place, but you take your heart that's full of greed, hatred and delusion with you. It's not those places that will save you. We must turn and investigate our own heart. That's where the cause is. That's where the stopping of it is. Again, just to finish off, in the Pali Canon, where the Buddha said, "O monks, in this fathom-long body lies the world, the beginning of the world, the end of the world, and the way that leads to the end of the world." We'll leave it there.